Pokemon has finally given me something that I've been asking for years with the announcement of Pokemon Legends ZA, and I don't think I've ever been as excited for the prospect of a new Pokemon game as I am now with this game. Not even the original Pokemon Legends Arceus hit me with this level of anticipation. Obviously, the prospect of iterating on the Legends formula of games is worth being excited about in its own right, but my reasoning doesn't solely lie there. Now, before I was even vaguely confident about what this game was going to look like after seeing the initial trailer, I expressed my hopes that it would be entirely contained to Lumio City in particular. Lo and behold, the official Pokemon Twitter account confirmed exactly that, much to my excitement and to the confusion and disappointment of a lot of the replies. Now, I get it. Everyone wants these massive sprawling regions with tons of things to explore and do, and the idea of containing a Pokemon game to just a single city seems reductive, right? But I'd argue the exact opposite. By limiting the scope to just the single, most defining area of the region, Game Freak is offered the opportunity to well and truly flesh it out in a significant way. As much as there is a genuine appeal to revisiting locales from the original region in a different time period, it's also kind of a losing battle when you need to drastically overhaul the entire form of the overworld. Personally speaking, Floraroma Town, just being a random patch of flowers in Legends Arceus, was perhaps my single biggest disappointment with that game. I was expecting something a little more like this. It didn't live up to so much as a minute fragment of my expectations, and it was one of my favorite locations in the Gen 4 originals. Pretty much every other major location from Diamond and Pearl felt the same way to some degree, but even that being the case, it isn't to say that Legends Arceus failed as an adaptation of the region itself, right? You of course have certain exceptions, like Jubilife Village and Mount Coronet, that are fleshed out in ways that contribute to the overall history of the region. And Hisui has its own unique character about it that you come to acquaint yourself with by the end of your journey. Many of its particular areas are adapted to fit the new scenario and therefore have their own contributions to it to make. It's really fun to watch as Jubilife Village gradually develops over time. It's interesting to see the historical origins of Team Galactic as a group. It's fun to travel around the Coronet Highlands, taking this area that was essentially just a single dungeon that you often revisited in the original game, and fleshing it out into something that feels like an entire miniature world in its own right. And that's what I imagine everyone hopes for from Legends ZA, to see Kalos fleshed out in a way that the originals couldn't properly accomplish, and focusing on a particular area of the original game gives the opportunity to do such a thing without spreading the developer's focus thin, trying to simply increase the scale of a pre-existing game. But focus isn't the only reason I'm excited about the prospect of a game limited exclusively to Lumia City. It also fulfills a desire to see a more expansive urban environment take center stage within a Pokemon RPG. In general, the Pokemon games tend to present cities as havens away from wild Pokemon, but there's no reason to keep that as a hard and fast rule. There's constant exceptions to this throughout the mainline games and the spin-offs, and there's pretty much never been any instance of this in the anime, which constantly features tons of urban wildlife. You don't need to be in the wild to have wild Pokemon. I mean, it's Paris, scatter some bedbug Pokemon around or something. The anime is actually what initially spurred my desire for a more urban-centered take on the mainline Pokemon formula. Because, unlike the games, which tend to focus more around traversing across wilderness with cities being centralized points where each boss is located, a lot of the unique scenarios in the show will focus just as much on stray Pokemon in the city as it will the Pokemon in the wilderness. The anime movies, if you haven't seen them, tend to be centered around a bunch of these really incredible and nearly utopian reimaginings of real-world cities that are almost solarpunk in nature. Take for example Altamare, which is based off Venice, or Alamos Town, which is based on Barcelona, or Crown City, which is based off Amsterdam, and also kind of Venice again a little bit, or LaRousse City, which is based off of Vancouver and kind of kickstarted this whole trend across the movies. New Torque City? Oh, look at that, my god. In any case, I think the sort of vibe these places tend to give off is where Pokemon as a setting thrives, within the intersection of nature and modernity, humans and Pokemon coexisting, and I want it more in the games. There's plenty of ways to incorporate it, and I really want Legends ZA to be the one to start doing so. Put some stray cats just chilling out around the city, have birds perched atop cafes that you can just catch, let me pet the ducks at the pond, give me gardens or give me death. Mostly, I just want the setting of this game to feel like what city life would be like if Pokemon truly lived together with humans, not just with individual trainers, but humans as a collective. And I want that reasoning to be turned back inwards as well, as justification for making a human dwelling feel somewhat more naturalistic than what we typically see in our world. That's the Pokemon I love and appeals to me beyond the individual creatures. I just love the hopeful window it creates of a humanity that lives in harmony with its environment instead of destroying it. Aside from that, the game looks very interesting conceptually and gets my brain racing with possibilities in the same way the original Legends Arceus reveal trailer did. You see, Legends Arceus was primarily based around the Meiji Restoration, this period where Japan was quickly modernizing after coming into contact with the rest of the world, specifically highlighting the annexation of Hokkaido that happened during that period. And while that was happening, around the same time frame in France was Baron Haussmann's renovation of Paris, commissioned by Napoleon III. He was tasked with taking the center of the city and reworking it so that it was less congested and people could navigate it more easily. Game Freak seems to be combining this event with the construction of the Eiffel Tower a few decades later for the 1889 World's Fair in order to create the historical basis for Lumio City's urban redevelopment plan, which is an incredibly fun idea. I'd imagine the construction of each boulevard will mark your progress through the game as we gradually watch Prism Tower get constructed at the central hub of the city, leading up to a big fair during the climax that mirrors the champion celebration at the end of the original X and Y games. The World's Fair is honestly a really underutilized setting in fiction. It's always a blast. I think centering a story around these different public works projects makes for a really compelling scenario, and I'm excited to see how it all pans out. Especially with the neon that we transition into for the animated portion of the trailer. It seems to be like representing the blueprints for the city plan, but it's also weirdly futuristic for the implied setting. But then I remembered, you know what else is weirdly futuristic compared to its intended setting? Zygarde. It's a mech. So I'm really curious where they're planning to go with that. Anyway, just a handful of sporadic thoughts on the game before I head out. First, I'm really surprised that they went straight to Gen 6 instead of Gen 5, even though I think it's the correct choice. Gen 6 is much more in need of fleshing out than Gen 5 is. It does make me sad that we aren't getting a Roaring Twenties themed game set in Castelia City though, but hopefully it's in the cards for next time. Second, please do not drop the ball on the character customization. X and Y did it the best of any entry in the series, and I want to see a return to that level of freedom more than anything else in X and Y. Third, I want to see a mecha battle in the middle of the city with 100% Zygarde. That's self-explanatory, like, obviously. Fourth, please make the game take advantage of the hardware of the Switch's successor. I want the game to run reasonably well if that's not too much to ask. And finally, I know everything I just said was about being happy that everything is being contained to Lumio City, but I really want an equivalent to Andorra in this game, just because I think it's very likely that this will end up being our last chance to get a locale based on it. Andorra is this microstate sandwiched between Spain and France that's partially governed by both, and I find that to be a really interesting thing to incorporate with the most recent region being Paldea. If it's not in the main game, then please at least as DLC. Oh, and my guesses for the starters are going to be Snivy, Mudkip, and Litten. We'll see how close I get.